you could say loaded question, but then beyond loaded, there's a definition of what is success. But before I got started, I thought it would be appropriate to introduce myself. So, who am I? So currently I work as a business development strategist for a company that is the global leader in cloud computing services. I previously ran the FP&A finance department for the air transportation division of that company, or branch of that company, and was also a transfer pricing expert, for those who are familiar with international tax. Outside of that, I taught at a college, a number of colleges, most recently Rockefeller College in New Jersey, taught economics, and in a shameless plug, as you can see, I wrote a book that's called Heroes of the Hard Court. Those interested, the copy is available. It was really about looking at a more scientific way of analyzing athletic performance, and really, is there a way to objectively rank athletic performance? That was the idea. And ultimately to rank or measure individual success. So that was the idea, and that sort of gave rise to this idea of success.
Oh, quick question on the last paragraph. You name one or two basketball players who you found are very good, who no one thinks about as being good?
Is the question, were there folks that I identified that majority of folks did not, or is the question?
Yeah, where your method ranks.
So the top 10 was the top 10 was
and
relatively, I'd say straightforward, except the order. There was a question mark at the order. And then that was a few years ago. So just FYI, LeBron was not in it because he was relatively young in his career. I'm sure if I did it now, it would be a change. No guesses as to who came out on top, but I'll let you guys decide. But anyway, let's talk about success. So let's ask the question. If I were to ask you, what is success to you? How would you define or interpret the determinants of success, or the measures of success, or the criteria that define success? How would you define it?
Well, I'm old enough to have looked back on enough of a path and say, if I had to do it again, would I change anything? If the answer is no, then I succeeded.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts? Just throw them out there.
Well, you could say internally, did I do well? Or you can look around and say, does the world think I did well?
Okay, interesting.
Well, I think it's a concoction of mindset and achievement, and whether you achieved what you had set your mind to do, and then if you have, then that's a success.
Okay. Any other thoughts? All good answers?
That you've done more good than harm in the world.
We're good going on. Okay, interesting.
Even by a microdot.
So the point is, when we think success and talk success, many different things come to mind, right? And we could put them like this, right? So for many people, success is results oriented, right? I achieve what I set out to achieve, whatever. The bottom line is, however we classify success, it follows somewhere like this. Goal attainment. Did I achieve some predetermined goal, right? And then that aligns to the issue of expectations. Did I meet my expectations? Well, what if my expectations were not realistic? So now we get into all of these issues as we talk about success. So let's look at then what success really is. The bottom line is, we can argue success from a results perspective, or we could argue from a performance perspective. Case in point. A few years ago, I had a student. This student, in my mind, wasn't a student. But the student got a B+ in my economics class. The student was incredibly upset. She actually never spoke to me. She went and complained to, I don't know who she complained to. She probably complained to everyone she could find, the dean, and because she thought she was an A student. My response to her was, I do believe you're an A student. However, your performance in the finals was not an A performance. So as much as you might be an A student, what you gave back to me was not an A performance. That was a B plus. She was extremely disappointed. I had another student in that same class, a young man. He got a C. The end of the semester, he came to me and thanked me. He was so excited he got a C. Clearly, there was a difference in expectation between both students. And so I always look at that and I talk about folks who are driven by more results versus those who are, how does performance matter to them? Then you get to the question of, I liken this as the journey versus the destination. Most of us who have traveled on road trips with children are familiar with this phrase, right? Are we there yet? That's just what kids do, right? 5 minutes into the journey, are we there yet? Why? Because kids, the only thing that seems to matter to them is the destination. And sometimes we have this conversation with, do we enjoy the journey along the way to the destination, or is the destination all that matters? Professional athletes talk about the process. And for them, what the process means is we're on the journey. So we have a destination in mind. We may not get there right away, but the journey is part of the destination. It's the process. That's the issue of performance versus results. And so we get into this notion that businesses use when we talk about measuring success. Short-term KPIs are key performance indicators. Versus when a company invests long-term to try to accomplish some goal, they're trying to build a factory or a plant or invest in a new facility, an R&D facility, for example. The payoff will occur long-term, not immediately. So they know that there is no way I'm going to put $100 million in this business and get $100 million return next month, right? So what they do to measure progress is have what we call key performance indicators. So along the way, I'm tracking. I don't expect to get the profit immediately, but I can track my KPIs to see, am I meeting my pre-stated goals along the way to ensure that I'm on the path to success. I saw this and I thought this captured part of what we're talking about, right? So this young man come to presumably his dad, asking him about success. His dad responds, success isn't as rewarding as it seems. I mean, look at Caesar. He was a great empire and all he got was a salad named after him. Another thing to think about when we're talking about success is how to measure it, as well as what's the timeline for accomplishing it. So, what do I want to achieve? How do I know that I've achieved it? And what's my time frame for achieving it? So, to a 4-year-old, success is not peeing in his pants. Turns out the same is true if you're 80. To a 12-year-old, success is having friends. Same as when you're 75, I suppose. I actually like this one, right? When you're a teenager going on to 20, success is finally having sex, presumably. But believe it or not, the same is true when you're 60, right? Or in your 60s. You just hope everything works, or that the wife isn't tired or having a headache or something, right? So the idea of success depends on so many different factors: timing, where you are in life, etc. So let's talk success then. So this is the outline I want to cover. And by the way, the purpose of this presentation today is just to limit us to a study of a few of history's most successful individuals. There is a segment of the study that I've created which looks at how to maximize your personal and professional development, but we won't be able to get into that because of time. So what we will do is just in a few minutes to review some of the studies that have been done on it, and then to look at how it applies to how some of history's most successful individuals actually applied the principles that I uncovered in my research. So one of the more recent studies on success is a book by Professor Angela Duckworth. It's called grit. Professor Duckworth she defined grit as this combination of passion and perseverance. And so it's not just talent that makes people successful, right? It's having both the passion and the perseverance to accomplish something. And her point was this: it's sticking with things over the very long term until you master them. And then goes on to say people who are gritty tend to be more successful even if they're not the smartest or the most talented. Why? Because grit is not about working incredibly hard, it is also about working smart. And then she identifies 5 characteristics that, in her mind, characterize this thing called grit and its role in channeling success. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into each of the studies or the work that have been done. You can research that on your own time, but I reference them because I'm going to use them as the basis for my classification for the 4 determinants of success as I've uncovered them. A second book, some of you are probably familiar with this. It was a bestseller many years ago by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He then wrote a follow-up called The 8th Habit. But he pointed out the 7 habits as be proactive, begin with the end in mind, which, by the way, if you're an author, every author always does that. They always write the end before the beginning, and then you fill it in. You put first things first, which is about prioritizing. You think win-win in negotiation strategies. You seek first to understand and then to be understood, which opens the lines of communication. And then he talks about synergize or synergies. And finally ends with this thing called sharpen the saw. And what he means by sharpen the saw is invest in you. You sharpen the saw is if you focus on developing you, body, mind, soul, and spirit, the more developed you are, the sharper you are, the better you are able to accomplish all the other things. And so that was his issue of his goals for, he listed it as effective performance, but that was a sort of an alternative speak for success. That these were the habits, which, by the way, opened the door for many people to then come up with habits as a condition for success. We're going to look at it later and really ask the question, how much can we replicate habits? Can being habitual actually lead to success? There is enough research on that, whether or not that's true. We'll sort of summarize that at the end. Another book that was very successful early on was two books written by Napoleon Hill. The turn of the 20th century, 100 years ago. He was the leading proponent on the study of success. He wrote his book, Laws of Success, and followed up with his bestseller, Think and Grow Rich. And his Laws of Success really had these 13 principles in them. And then his Think and Grow Rich, I think, summarized them to about 10. But the principles were still the same. This was the first motivational speaker, presumably in US history, right? Think and Grow Rich sold some millions of copies for how it presented. Think of this as growing rich as replace that with success. How to think and become successful. Riches for him was his definition of success. But the idea was it begins with desire. It follows through with faith. And then this one, I'll speak a little bit on author suggestion. Author suggestion was his version of if you can think it, his actual words were, if you think it and believe it, you can achieve it. Sounds like some new age type philosophy, but this was discussed 100 years ago. And the idea was, he said, thoughts are things. People become successful when they can internalize their thoughts and make it become a thing, something tangible. You move your thoughts from being just a thought to being something tangible that you can touch, and then eventually it will motivate you to success. Few others, don't necessarily want to speak to all of them. Again, I'm just trying to do a quick overview. Specialized knowledge, imagination, organized planning, decision, persistence, power of the mastermind, good one, which is about having a team. a like-minded team that can help hold you accountable and help drive towards success. The sixth sense, I'll speak to the sixth sense later in the summary, so I won't speak too much to the rest of this, but these were the principles he identified in his study of trying to understand what leads to success.
Power of the mystery of sex transmutation.
Yeah, I knew someone was going to ask me about that. Look, I got my wife here, so I don't necessarily want her to, but his position was, and I don't necessarily believe this to be true, right? But his position was that men
Yeah, I knew this was
spend too much time thinking about sex. Guys, don't listen to what this says. Men spend too much time thinking about sex, and if they took the same thoughts and passion and desires they had for sex and applied it to some other area of life that they really want to accomplish something, they'll be more successful. That was his theory, and it's a theory, guys. It's just a theory. But that was his thinking on the matter, right? But it was an interesting thought. There was some studies built up around it, whether they were true or not. I'm not an expert on this one, but his argument was.
Curious.
By the way, just as an FYI, right? This is a complete FYI, unrelated to this. We all know of Kellogg cornflakes. So the brother, William Kellogg, invented Kellogg's cornflakes. Actually, his brother, John Kellogg, technically did. Sold the recipe to his brother, William, who John thought was slow. There was the term 100 years ago, they were slow. And John was the physician who was this world-renowned physician. And the result was, he was married, I think, for 40 years, but remained celibate his entire life. Because he believed in this principle of that. So that's an FYI. But anyway, his brother, who he considered slow, William, was the one who ended up becoming successful. William bought the recipe from it, turned it into Kellogg's, and made a fortune out of it. His older brother didn't think it would amount to much. He was the one everybody remembers, not the guy who was more famous physician.
He had a lot to do with the proliferation of lobotomies as well.
He may have, I'm not too familiar with the story, but I just remember that one.
So did John think he succeeded according to whatever definition he had?
He probably did. He was world renowned at the time as a physician, but he ended his career not being overshadowed by his younger brother, who he thought was slow. So
that's why he turned it to
so maybe that explains that, right? All right, so I'm going to move on this before we get in trouble talking about transmutation. There's this book. This is actually maybe 10, 20 years ago now. Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. This book became a bestseller in understanding corporate strategy. But I found many of the principles of it still apply to individual strategy as well on success or trying to achieve success. Speak to some of them. Now, level 5 leadership is really a leader who is both understanding and somewhat compassionate, but also definitive and strong-willed. Not necessarily from an individual perspective, really from a corporate strategy, but then he had this other view on first who, then what. The idea being, if you want to build a good corporation, don't worry about what your strategy is. Focus first on getting the right people. You find the right people, you can build a good strategy around the right people. That was his idea. He used the school bus principle, but we don't have to get into that. But I did like this one, part number 3. Confront the brutal facts. It's called a Stockdale paradox, right? The brutal facts is always confront the truth. We live in a world these days where truth doesn't always mean truth. We have a hard time really articulating and understanding what truth is. We have this thing called fake facts or fake news or whatever. It's hard to define. But he really said, look, if you want to truly be successful, confront the facts as they are. To go back in time, I live by this paradox. William Shakespeare, I think it was Macbeth, he said, to thine own self,
Be true.
be true. Which means, why would you want to lie to yourself? confront the brutal facts. But then it leads to this thing called the Stockdale paradox, which is we always tell folks, and you saw with grit, persevere, never give up, fight hard. But at what point do you confront the brutal facts that maybe this is not for you? If you've been trying hard and never succeeding, maybe this is not the route you should be in. So that's what the Stockdale principle paradox is. You confront the brutal facts, but you fight as hard as you can, but at some point you need to know whether or not the path you're on is the right path. And that's a challenge many people face as they're trying to pursue success. And then he speaks about the hedgehog concept. Again, if I were going to do the workshop version of this, I would get into this in more detail, but I'll just summarize this by saying, this is the hedgehog principle. I know you can't see it, I was going to blow it up, but I didn't want to spend too much time on other people's work for this presentation. The idea is this: find what you're passionate about, that's one of the circles. Find what you're really good at, you're one of the best in the world at, that's the other circle. And then find what truly has solid economic value that can generate economic success for you. The intersection of all three is where you should be focused. What you're passionate about, what you're really good at, and where there is economic value. A lot of time folks focus on what they're passionate about, but there really isn't. Just because you're good at something, just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean you're good at it.
Yeah.
Or just because you love it and you're probably good at it. So for example, you love to bake, your grandma's favorite recipe or something. You might be passionate about it, you might be good at it, or your grandma might be good at it, but if there is no business model behind it, so it's really the hedgehog principle, right? Find the intersection of the three as a way of trying to determine success. The rest
Why is it called hedgehog?
I don't remember. I haven't read this book in a while. I apologize. I should have looked at it, but yeah, I don't remember why he called it hedgehog. It's a good question.
There's a fable of the something and the hedgehog. I think the first something was fox or something like that.
Is that right? Yeah, it may be, but it's a good question. I'd have to go back and just look at it. And then there is this one, right? Again, these are work that were done from a corporate setting, In Search of Excellence by Peters and Waterman. I'll skip through this real quickly. Just 8 principles on success. McKinsey, you guys have heard of the consultant firm McKinsey, built this model, 7 S's of success. Again, don't wish to spend too much time on it. These are a lot of studies that were done to really understand what drives success. And then, of course, many of you may be familiar with some of the psychoanalytical discussions on success. I list here these 5 theories or models. Most famous, most people may be aware of, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, where the idea of achieving self-actualization leads one to a level of fulfillment or success. So there have been all these studies done on success. Now the question is, what does this all mean for us? So I'd like to then summarize everything that we've just covered, all the major works that have been done. There have been other sort of academic studies that are probably too esoteric to have a true discussion on. But all of these studies that we just covered could be summarized into these 20 key concepts. Visionary, sacrificial, communicator, risk taker, marginalist thinker. We'll get into some of these later. Prioritizer, someone who's diligent, action-oriented, an anti-perfectionist, which is quite interesting. We'll talk about that too. Hunger, desire, motivation, passion, grit or persistence, which you're seeing something of. Confidence, belief, focus, drive, discipline, and adaptability. Again, we'll talk about. As these are some of the 20 most, of all the studies we covered, they summarize well into what we consider these 20 key action themes of what drives success. And then I undergird them with this, what I call an intangible or it factor. It's similar to the Napoleon Hill when he spoke about the 6th sense. He mentioned this thing where And what the it factor is, the intangible is, two people could do exactly the same things, and we've seen studies of twins grow up in the same environment, achieve the same structure, and one become more successful than the other. Sibling studies have seen the same thing. And the question is why? Is it just, which is why I come back to saying I dismiss anything that says habits. Follow these habits and you'll be successful.
Yeah.
Because habits don't lead to success. Habits can lead to, what's the right word? Certain habitual behavior, but it just doesn't guarantee success. There is this thing called the intangible. Businesses, why businesses succeed and others fail? They have what we call intangibles. We can't measure them, but we know they exist. Leadership intangibles, product intangibles, key strategy intangibles. And all these I summarize into these 4 key pillars, or what I call dimensions. The strategic dimension, the tactical dimension, the emotional, and the mental. And these are the key concepts under which each of these pillars or dimensions follow. And so let's talk about the 4 dimensions as I've uncovered them in my research. The 4 dimensions of success really help us as we think about what drives success in individuals. I list here the technical, and I'll talk about the technical in a minute. But let's talk about what the 4 dimensions of success lead to. If you think about life in its fundamental state, so many aspects of life we can speak to fundamentally from 4 perspectives. So for example, we talk about earth, wind, fire, and water, 4 elements of nature. We talk about east, west, north, and south, the 4 coordinates of direction. Body, mind, soul, and spirit. 4 sort of identifiers codified in scripture. So the 4 dimensions of success captures everything we looked at the last research and studies into these 4 broad categories that I call them dimensions of success. And I want to spend a minute and talk about technical. Why is a technical skill not a dimension of success? Because a technical skill is the bare minimum that's necessary to accomplish a task, but in and of itself won't make you successful. To be a golfer on the PGA Tour, everyone has to know to drive a golf ball at least 250 yards. Everyone has to know how to sink a putt 6 or 10 feet, whatever the case may be. Everyone has the bare skills, but it doesn't mean that that all of them are going to win a championship. The bare skills is the technical skills necessary to accomplish a task. It's like you have to pass the bar to be a lawyer, but it doesn't mean you're going to be successful. You have to go to medical school to be a doctor, but that bare minimum technical skills is not enough to guarantee your success, but it's necessary to help you to achieve, to just operate in that field. To be a tennis player, professional tennis player, have to be able to serve, have a good ground stroke, have a good backhand, or at least a reasonably good one. Those technical skills are not enough to guarantee you success, but they're bare minimum. So a technical skill is not a guarantee of success. Matter of fact, we can show the reverse. Corporations, and I'll actually show you individuals that I've studied, that they achieve success by hiring technical experts in the areas that they're deficient and still accomplish success. 2 examples I'll point to in a few minutes. John D. Rockefeller and Henry Ford. When we get to them, you will see. They did not have some of the technical expertise in the areas they were successful in. What did they do? They went out and they hired the right people to do that. So the technical skill, while important, is not a determinant of success. And it's sometimes important that we understand it. Determinants of success are the strategic, the tactical, which is the ability to execute, the emotional, and the mental. In order for me to demonstrate this some more, I decided to use some sporting analogies to help explain this and to drive the point home. And so I used the football principle to demonstrate its strategic dimension of success. The baseball principle to explain the tactical, the basketball principle for the emotional, and the tennis principle for the mental. And the idea is sports are a microcosm of life. For those of us who have tried to understand life and corporate strategy, strategy plays out over the long term. One of the beauty of sports is a result can be derived at the end of a game or the end of a season, or you can study the success over a career, but it's a shorter time span than life itself. But the lessons you learn from understanding and studying sports translate into the broader concept of life. And so we use sports analogies just to help to amplify what is being told here. So the football principle. We talk about the game of football requires strategic interaction, right, between the offense and the defense, as we'll show in a little bit. Baseball is about executing the strategy. A strategy is very good no matter how you define it, develop it, but it has to be executed in order to achieve success. And then we talk about the emotional. Emotions are a natural part of life. I think we downplay the importance of emotions in success, and I'd like to emphasize that here. And we use the basketball principle to highlight that. And then the last one is the tennis principle, the mental aspect of success. One that I think is often overlooked. So let's talk about them real quick. Let's talk about football. This is American football. So many of you are familiar with football. Some of you are probably not. The game is won at the line of scrimmage. There's an offense and the defense, offensive line and the defensive line. The offensive line's job is to block for the quarterback and open holes for the running back to run through. The defensive line job is to stop the offensive line from getting their job done. The bottom line is the game is won at the line of scrimmage. So for us, understanding success is always about understanding what our line of scrimmage is in whatever role we're operating. What are the key blockers to our business success? And then we talk about know your game plan. And this one, which is so key, we'll spend some time with it in the next slide. Success comes in stages. How do you understand and define your success through your stages? This is about the strategic aspect of success is about understanding proactive versus reactive responses that derive through different situations, right? And the way to think about it is coaches set the strategic direction and personnel, play calling. However, it's executed by the players, right? But the strategic direction is key. Let's talk about this. So this is a very key one. We talked about this before. Know your definition of success. So last NFL season, sorry, not 2023, but the 22 NFL season that ended February 23, 2 NFL teams were successful, achieved success. Most of us remember the first one, the Kansas City Chiefs. They won the Super Bowl. Probably going to do it this year again, you know. After this, I'm going to try to catch the game. But anyway.
At 4:30 today.
Yeah, jeez, don't remind. Is it 4:30? I thought it was 8:30.
Well, probably another game at
Yeah, 8:30. So we all know the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. That was the first team to be successful. But how many people knew that this team was also successful? The Chicago Bears. They finished last in the league. But by virtue of finishing last, they got the first overall pick, which they traded and also got the first overall pick this year. So just like I had those 2 students, one where a B+ was a disappointment, the other one where a C was great, you know, these teams were competing in 2 different leagues, even though they were in both NFL, because their objectives were different. And so that leads us to understand, know your definition of success, right? Some people go into a business and their job is just to make ends meet. Others, they want to be the next John D. Rockefeller, right? So whatever your objective is has to be clear up front. So, and then we get into, this is the strategic nature of football. it exists on three planes: the short term, the medium term, and the long term. Just like life. Let's see if we can understand this here. I was going to bring my football and decided not to. But the game of football is like this. For those who are not familiar, I'll spend a minute and walk you through what the game of football is. You get 4 chances to advance the ball. The offense gets 4 chances to advance the ball 10 yards down the field. That's called a first down. So the first time they get the ball, it's called 1st and 10. First chance to go 10 yards. Depending on how many yards they get the first time, let's assume they got 2 yards. The second chance they get is going to be 2nd down and 8 yards to go, or 2nd and 8. Follow? And the third chance, let's assume after their 2nd down play, they got 5 yards. Now they have 3 yards to go. So in their third play, it's 3rd down with 3 yards to go, 3rd and 3. So now you all understand football. We can enjoy the game afterwards, right? But that's the key. So the short-term goal of the offense is just to get the first down. That's their short-term goal. Every time they get on the field, their first goal is, I'm not trying to win the game on that play. I'm trying to get first down. That's my short-term goal. Now, what is my medium-term goal? Is to get enough first downs to score a touchdown, right? So I just want to string a few first downs together to get a touchdown. My long-term goal is to win the game, to score enough touchdowns to win the game. I liken it to a student where short-term, your goal is just pass the exam. You've got an exam, that's your immediate goal. Focus on passing your exam, passing the test, finishing your assignment. Your medium-term goal, finish the semester. What's your long-term goal? Graduate. Every success can be broken down into stages. Successful people break those down into discrete stages that are then measurable and manageable. So you measure success by setting your goals at a manageable level and measuring your success against them. That's how the strategic nature of football. And obviously you win enough games, you translate that into a championship. That's your very long run. I use the same analogy when I talk to people when you're looking at your retirement strategy. Yeah, your long-term strategy is you want to retire comfortably. That's winning the championship. And you might define that however you choose to, right? I need $1 million when I'm 65 to retire comfortably. Whatever your number is. Your number could be $10 million. I don't care, right? But then you break your strategy down. The strategy says, okay, that means by the time I'm 50, I should have X amount in my retirement account. Or by the time I'm 40, I should have X amount in my retirement account. And then you keep breaking the strategy down. That means I need to put X down each year in my retirement account. And if I need to put $20,000 a year in my retirement account, so I work backwards, right? So that's how we plan successfully. You work backwards. If I need $2 million, how much do I need when I'm X year? How much does it need to compound grow? How much do I need to put down if I need to put down $20,000 a year? Okay, how does that translate into how much I should take out of my paycheck every pay period? Mm-hmm. That's my short-term goal. So your success is I start with my long-term plan, I break it down into what's my long-term, medium-term, short-term goals. That's how the NFL does it. And then the NFL does this other thing. We talk about this. Understand your line of scrimmage. Where are your key blockers to success? Whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, what are the issues that will stop me from achieving that goal? And how do I remove those blockers out of the way? That's the strategic aspect of success. Breaking down my goals and objectives into manageable tasks and then creating measurable objectives against those tasks and figuring out what do I need to accomplish them. Let's look at a success where this was concerned. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt, considered America's first business tycoon. In fact, he was the first person in American history to achieve $100 million. This was in the 1870s, so that was kind of a big deal back then. For him, it was all about taking risks. Grew up poor in Staten Island, started operating managing his father's boat, dropped out of school as I think 12 years old or 11. Managed his father's boat business, steamboat business, until he had enough money to buy his own steamboats, managing them from Long Island and New Jersey into Manhattan. That was his initial business. Became so successful doing that, that in the 1840s, he moved away from small regional steamboats into steamships, ocean-worthy steamships, going all along the East Coast. And when the gold rush in California began, 1849, they started to transport the gold from California down the West Coast, took mules to bring them through Nicaragua and Panama, and he would have a steamship business that would bring them from Nicaragua up to New York. That's how he became successful. He even considered building the Panama Canal to aid the process, which is sort of the reason why Panama ended up, I think 30 years later, getting the Panama Canal, because he had died at the time, but he had begun looking into that as an option. But why was the strategic aspect of him? Something happened. So in 1847, while he was 53 years old, he got an opportunity to start managing the New York, Providence, and Boston rail line. I think it was called Stonegate. What happened was the rails would run from Boston all the way down to Long Island. Then they would take the goods and put them on the steamships and transport them into New York. He started to see there must be a business in this railroad operation. And he got to a point when he was 70 years old. He had this epiphany. He decided he was going to divest out of the steamship business, which had given him his millions and made him very incredibly successful. And he put everything, like a gambler, all in the railroad business. And he actually became incredibly rich by doing that. Risk taker. He understood that even though he was successful in the steamship business, he saw that there was something coming that was actually going to be more successful than steamships in the railroad. And he became a railroad tycoon, even though he was best known for shipping, which is why they call him the Commodore. Because back then it was a nickname given to him, but he became so successful that he transferred all his wealth into railroads. Built the first Grand Central station, eventually got torn down, and the new Grand Central was built in 1913, but on the same ground that he built the original Grand Central. Why? Because he understood as a visionary, the key to success is being a risk taker and being a marginalist thinker, which is, no matter what I'm doing right now to be successful, I have to look at where am I going to be successful, or what is going to be the driver of my success in the future. All right, so real quickly, I'm running out of time. I'm going to just quickly jump to the tactical aspect of success using the baseball principle. And I want to just quickly focus on this: implementation or execution. You can have all the great plans in the world. Success will not occur unless you're able to implement a strategy that was developed. And that's really the skill that we learn from baseball. But I want to share something about baseball, which I know most people don't think about and therefore don't quite understand. When you think baseball, most people think success. I'm going to use a hitting analogy in baseball. The best hitters in baseball hit what we call 300. What does this mean? It means every 10 times you come to the plate, you get 3 hits every 10 times. On average, last year, Major League Baseball hitters hit 248. Let's round it up to 250, just to make it simple, make the math simple. What does this mean? It means for each 4 times they came to the plate, they got 1 hit for every 4 times they came to the plate. They hit the ball where there wasn't a fielder, they ran to first base. 1 hit every 4 times. But I want to show you this. Last year, the average baseball hitter faced 3.9 pitches every time they came to the plate. That means is they came to the plate, 1 pitch they didn't swing at, the pitch went by. It wasn't an out, just went by. The second time they may have swung at a pitch and missed. The third time they may have swung at a pitch, made contact, but they fouled it off, right? Didn't go into play. By the 4th time, maybe they hit the ball and it went into play. What does this mean? How do we convert all of this? We would say, and that's I just want you to think about how we define failure now, not success, but failure. We would say that a baseball hitter failed 3 out of 4 times because they got 1 hit for each 4 times they came to bat. So they failed 3 out of 4 times. Yet, sorry, I need some water.
Water.
They do not, thanks, appreciate it. Yet we don't think about them as failing 3 out of 4 times. We say they hit 1 out of 4 times. But the key here is they faced 16 pitches before they got 1 hit. Even though it counts as just 4 at-bats. Do you follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They faced 16 pitches. So they failed 15 times they saw a pitch. They did nothing with it. 1 time out of 16, they made a hit. And yet we don't consider them a failure for missing 15 pitches out of the 16. Yet when we look at ourselves to try to measure success, we are so hard on ourselves because we don't know how to measure success in our own lives. True success is not understanding where you fail, it's understanding the lessons you learn from failure. So understand what the true measure of success is in whatever field you're going in at. Because a guy can miss 15 out of 16 balls and we still don't call him a failure. And in our lives, we fail, we give up when we think we have not achieved what we're trying to achieve. As we look at the tactical aspect, I want to summarize this with the Eisenhower principle. Eisenhower developed this principle when he was still general in World War II, before he became president, where he asked the question, is this something urgent or is it important? And that was his moniker for deciding whether to act. His position was, if it's urgent and it's important, it's something that should be done right now. Drop everything else, get it done right away. If it's, I'm so sorry. If it's urgent but it's not important, delegate it to someone else. You shouldn't be spending your time on it. But if you delegate it to them, then to that person, it should be both urgent and important. So they should do it right away. But if it's not important for you to do it right away, delegate it because it's urgent, but it's not important to you. If it's important, but it's not urgent, schedule it for a future time. So get it done, but don't do it right away because it's not important to do it right now. And if it's neither urgent nor important, get rid of it. It should not be in your inbox. That was his principle. He built this principle while as a general, kept it even while he was president, and became the Eisenhower decision matrix. Let's talk about some men who, as we study them in history, utilize the principle of the tactical measure of success. John D. Rockefeller understood the principle of working backwards to achieve your goals. When he was a teenager, presumably he was about 15, he was asked what he wanted to accomplish in life. He said 2 things. He said, I want to make $100,000 and I want to live to 100. At the time, he was actually earning less than $1 a day. Less than $1 a day, close to 50 cents a day. But he said, he wanted to earn $100,000. My guess is, and this is just a guess, that he couldn't have thought beyond $100,000. You know, when some of us speak, we're going to say $1 million. I want $1 million because that's the furthest we can think. I think he couldn't have thought beyond $100,000. So he just said, I want $100,000. By the time he died, he became America's first billionaire with a wealth of nearly $900 million in 100 years ago. And he lived to be 97 years, 2 months shy of his 98th birthday. So he did achieve one goal, just missed the other. Yeah. Now, how did he accomplish this? He did everything he could when he was young. Worked as a bookkeeper, was a debt collector, started a retail business early in life and first working for someone else. He was a hustler. Grew up poor, but decided he wanted to make something of himself. He was ruthless. Now, some of these good characters I'm going to tell you about were not necessarily the most ethical of individuals. And I'm not here to vouch for some of their ethical decisions in life. Just what inspired them to success. At age 24, he had about $4,000 saved. He started working $16 a month, and he worked almost 30 days a week. The very few days he didn't work as a teenager. $16 a month. Eventually increased to $50 a month, and he saved almost every penny. So by the time he was 24, he had amassed $4,000. He invested it in an oil refinery with a partner and built it up to a point where eventually Cornelius Vanderbilt approached him about transporting his products on Vanderbilt's railroad when Vanderbilt was later in life. He struck a deal with Vanderbilt to transport, at the time, kerosene. That was the main product that it was producing. And he was not able to produce the capacity that he needed to fulfill his contract with Vanderbilt. He went around to every other kerosene producer and tried to strike deals with them so he could get enough products because he didn't want to lose his deal with Vanderbilt. He did whatever it takes. And I use the term, just do it. So before Nike figured it out, Rockefeller figured out, just do it. That was his mantra for success. He did not know how to refine oil. He hired a chemist named Andrews, and he was the one, Andrews, who developed the production process for refining oil that Rockefeller exploited into building an empire. At the time, producers of crude would waste 40% of whatever they extracted from the earth. Their process was very inefficient. He was determined to remove any production inefficiencies from the system. And he was able ultimately he produced kerosene, the byproduct was gasoline. When every other refiner was dumping gasoline back in the 1870s because they had no use for it, remember, we hadn't built the automobile yet, he figured out a way to use the gasoline in his factories, with his plants, with his machinery, so he didn't have to waste it. So when others were wasting, he was able to build efficiencies to buy out his competitors, and eventually he was able to control over 90% of the kerosene market. And by the time gasoline-powered vehicles came on board, he was already ahead of the game, so he was able to transfer that technology into producing gasoline. And then when he became so successful, Vanderbilt teamed with another rival named Thomas Scott to raise the price on him because they wanted to extract some business out of him because it was becoming so successful. He decided to invest in pipes. That was before. This again, 1870s, well before anyone thought about that, he built these pipelines to distribute kerosene products, a visionary well before his time. And we'll talk about this when we get to Carnegie. He decided to shut down his refinery in Pittsburgh just because he wanted to punish someone. What he understood was, to be successful, you've got to have a can-do attitude. And that was his attitude. It was his principle that drove him to be successful. Do whatever it took to become successful. Another one that I thought is very useful in this regard is Henry Ford and how he used the tactical aspect of success. He was an engineer at Edison Company, and they're in Michigan. He began at 28. 2 years later, he got promoted to chief engineer. But all along, he kept tinkering on engines. He believed in producing gasoline-powered engines. So he would work at night after he came home from working as an engineer. And once he got promoted to chief engineer, he didn't have to do other odd jobs. So he decided to focus exclusively now on building gasoline engines. And so by 1896, he produced his first vehicle called a quadricycle, which, if it looks like two bicycles that are just stuck together with a little engine, that's exactly what it was. But it never stopped him from trying to improve. So from his first quadricycle, he decided to build something. Now I'm going to pause here and share a story. He understood this thing about not being a perfectionist. I call it the anti-perfectionist. About a decade or so ago, decade and a half maybe, I was in negotiations. I was representing one side of a business transaction. I went in, I was the expert valuing a particular business. So I built the financial model, looking at the cash flow and the discount rate and all kinds of stuff. And I came in with a model. This is how much I think the business is worth. There was a negotiation team on the other side. They came with their expert, and he came with his model. This is how much he thinks the business is worth. One of us was trying to buy, the other was the seller. Understand? And so we're negotiating back and forth. I had a lot of problems with this other experts model. And so I challenged it, and I tore down his model, and I tell him where it was wrong, and back and forth. And so we couldn't come to a meeting of the minds. And the lead lawyer, the lead negotiating lawyer for the other side, turned to me at one time. We were going late in the night in these negotiations. We couldn't make a headway. She said to me, "Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. You're trying to get perfection, we'll never come to an agreement." And so that stuck with me, and I never forgot it. And so going forward, I've always thought about, when I'm trying to accomplish something, yes, I want it to be perfect, but can I have it good enough to a point where I can then iterate on it and make it better later? And this was what Henry Ford learned. So you heard about the Model T that he created in 1908. So T is what? The 20th letter in the alphabet? Henry Ford was a practical guy. So this was his Model A, which he launched in 1903. There was a problem with the transmission. It didn't work right. And all other 19 models from A to S, he couldn't get the transmission to work. Other little aspects. He kept fixing one part, but there was always something else. But he still sold it. He sold 1,700 of the Model A. He didn't sell any of the Model B. It was a concept. But he sold the Model C. Brought it to market. But he kept understanding, if I'm trying to wait until it becomes perfect, I'll never get it to market. He continued until, in 2008, he built the Model T. And he got the transmission to a point where he could patent it, finally. Because he finally figured out how to make it work. Sometimes success is not about trying to be perfect. It's trying about, how do I just keep advancing the next level until I achieve a level of success. He even went on to do things radical by his days. Pioneered this productivity and pay tactic. When everyone was paid their workers $2 a day, he paid $5. But what he did was, he created this moving assembly line, and so he output increased, I think, 5-fold or 10-fold. Output increased so much that on a pay per product basis, he was actually paying less. Very radical in his thinking. But all he understood was success was about getting things done, moving it along from the A to the B all the way to the T, until he finally figured out something that was saleable. That's the tactical aspect of success. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'll just quickly run through these, right? The basketball principle is about operating with heart. And here is where I want us to understand. This is the key I want us to focus on. If I ask many people, do you love to sell? The vast majority of us will say no. Because most of us don't consider ourselves salespeople. We don't love to sell. We don't love to go to Dennis and say, Dennis, do you want to buy this? It's $10, right? We don't like to hear no. The basketball principle is this. When you make the shot, you assume the shot is going to go in, but you always anticipate and put yourself in position for the rebound. The emotional aspect is about hunger, desire, passion, and motivation. It's always about how do I overcome failures, right? Winners never quit. Quitters never win. That was Vince Lombardi. I need to run through because of time. Let's talk about emotional aspect of success, right? Most of us remember Michael Jordan, remember him from this. Winning his 6 NBA championships with the Bulls, right? Great team. But how many of us remember him like this? Yeah. In his high school basketball team. So the story of Michael Jordan goes like this. I put cut in quotes because he was never really cut, he just never made the team. His sophomore year, he wanted to play for the varsity basketball team. But his coach said, at the time, this is the context now. He was 15 years old, he was 5'10", means he was short by my standards. He eventually grew to 6'6", so he grew another 8 inches. But high school sophomore year, 15 years old, wanted to make the team. His coach said, MJ, your ball control is good. He was a point guard, but his shooting needed to improve and his defense definitely needed to improve. So he said, you can't make the high school team, but I'm putting you on the JV team. Michael said he went home and cried to his mother. And then when they interviewed his mom, her name is Dolores, Dolores said, I cried with him because I knew how much he wanted him. And then she said, all I want you to do, Mike, they called him Mike then, is get back in the gym and work harder. And that's all he did. Went back in the gym and worked harder. Michael said later, when they did the documentary The Last Dance, and they interviewed him and asked him about that, he said, whenever I got tired when I'm working out, I close my eyes sometimes and I would see the list that the coach put up on the basketball in the gym when I didn't make the team. And that's what motivates me, because my name was not on it. The greatest player, arguably, that ever played basketball got cut from his basketball team, which means he never made it as a sophomore, and that was what fueled him to become the player that he was. Emotion. Emotion can be a powerful thing if we know how to channel it in the right manner. That was his case. There's another case of, I call it the son's revenge. 2 men, one you've definitely heard of called J.P.Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan. The other one is a guy most of us never heard of. It's called Forrest Mars, but you know the products his company makes. Both of them had fathers that were disappointed in them, and they used it as motivation to drive them to success. J.P.Morgan, his father's name was Julius, was a renowned banker in London, but all he did was government bonds. He was a commissaire. He helped broker deals for government bonds. He told J.P. Morgan do not get involved in risky trades. Don't involve in corporate debt, corporate bonds, corporate loans. Only do government bonds because they're safe. Every time JP wanted to break out, his father kept on him and really made him feel inferior. It turns out the break that came for J.P.Morgan was when his father died. His father died in an accident in 1890. And so not only did he not have his father's derision that caused him angst, but he also inherited his father's wealth. He was an only child. What did J.P.Morgan end up doing after his father died? All he did was make some bold investments that changed the course of American history. He invested in Edison's operations, eventually creating GE, which was initially created as Edison General Electric. He bought out Edison and changed the name to General Electric. That was when the company was founded. He bought Andrew Carnegie's steel company, Carnegie Steel, combined it with other steel enterprises and created a company called US Steel, still exists. And he invested in International Harvester. All of that he did after his father died, when he finally broke it up his shadow. Why? Because he wanted to prove his father wrong. And then in 1907, when the stock market crashed, he bailed out the stock market again and became the first sort of US banker. Another story, and this one is even more, is less known, but I think there's a level of impressiveness on this. Forrest Mars. His father's name was Frank Mars. They actually together developed the Milky Way. Say that cautiously. Frank Mars developed the Milky Way, but Forrest presumably gave him the idea. They were drinking a milkshake at the time. Forrest came up with the idea, but his dad actually implemented it, made it happen. Frank Mars created a company, Mars Candy. They also created Three Musketeers. Forrest had all these great ideas. His father kept putting him down. It wasn't good enough. Forrest left, went to England. While he was there, Frank, his dad, died. And Forrest wanted to come back and take over the company, but he had no money. He ended up created M&M with another interesting story. The then president of Hershey Chocolate. His name was William Murray. William Murray was the president of Hershey at the time. Milton Hershey was the CEO. Milton Hershey retired, but he did not give the company over to William Murray. He gave it to another fellow. So William Murray felt sidelined. What did he do? He then joined forces with Forrest Mars to form M&M. So by the way, M&M means Mars and Murray. Fun fact. But he never left his job, by the way, so he actually did not take a controlling interest in the company. He put his son in the M&M company while he still worked for Milton Hershey. Again, fun fact. Forrest made enough money selling M&Ms, which he discovered M&Ms because he went to London and saw similar candies called Smarties. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Almost identical. Apparently there is no such thing as, what's the legal thing, right? Patents or whatever. You could just borrow the idea. Got enough money from M&Ms that he bought out Mars Candy and made it Mars Inc. And by the way, today, I'm told Mars family is the third wealthiest family in America because of Forrest Mars. Not what his father did, but he did it because he wanted to avenge how his father felt of it. Revenge. Sometimes emotions, we tell folks emotions have no place in business. Emotion is the passion that fuels business success. And then there was Andrew Carnegie. Oh my God, I'm running out of time. Probably the most powerful emotional story of success in American history. His mentor's name was Tom Scott. We talked about Tom Scott earlier with Rockefeller. Rockefeller crushed Tom Scott when he shut down the Pittsburgh refinery. Tom Scott ran the Pittsburgh railroad, and it actually made him bankrupt. Carnegie, Tom Scott was Carnegie's mentor, took him into business, gave him every opportunity to succeed. In fact, Carnegie became successful because Tom Scott gave him the contract to build the Eads Bridge. At the time, bridges were built using wooden frame. He developed steel. Steel existed before. There was a guy called Frank Bessemer. He worked with Bessemer to develop a way to produce steel, built the bridge using steel, and every bridge in America after that was built using steel, including the Brooklyn Bridge with the same principle. So it was because of Tom Scott that Carnegie got his break, that Carnegie actually found steel, that Carnegie created Carnegie Steel, that Carnegie figured out to use steel to build structures for buildings, that Carnegie became a billionaire. All because of Tom Scott. When Rockefeller bankrupted Scott, it inflamed Carnegie, who was his mentor. And it was his driving passion to get back at John Rockefeller. It was that revenge that made him successful. He couldn't directly attack Rockefeller because they weren't in the same industry. The only thing he could do was beat him by becoming wealthier than him. That was, in his mind, the only thing he could do. He accomplished that when he sold his company to J.P.Morgan, who converted it to U.S. Steel, made him at the time the wealthiest man in America, possibly the world. And then he had this running rivalry with Rockefeller in terms of who would be the wealthiest. They kept going back and forth, and then they tried to outcompete each other in philanthropy. But all of his success could be traced back to the death of this guy and his desire to seek revenge. Emotion, one of the great vehicles and tools for success that most people discount, but it's critical to success. All right, as time is running, let's talk about the tennis principle, and I'll just be as quick as I can. Some of you are smelling lunch. When I was in high school, a friend of mine was the captain of the high school tennis team. He was really good, and I asked him, I said, how do you become so good? And he said, when he was young, a coach told him, don't play to win the match, play to win every point. And that's the principle, play to win every point. So what is the mental aspect of success? It's resilience, focus, and a never quit attitude. So there's a story, Yana Nevada. 1993, she's playing the Wimbledon finals against Steffi Graf. Yana was up, they were tied 1 apiece. She was up 4 games to 1, and she had game point, 1 point away from going 5-1. And something happened. Yana choked. She double faulted. Game went to deuce, lost the game to Steffi, and then Steffi won the next 16 points. Won 4 straight games. Beat Yana. It was remembered all over the world because Yana couldn't stop crying. She just broke down. At the end of the match, they couldn't interview her because she just kept crying. The Duchess of Cambridge came to give her her trophy, second place trophy. She just couldn't stop crying. The moral of the story, she went again in 1997 to the Wimbledon finals, lost again, but then finally won in 1998. Her only title ever, 1998. And the lesson here is mental resilience and grit. She broke down because she choked. But eventually she developed the belief and the confidence to become successful. And this story reminds me, and we'll just be quick. I'm actually going to skip Edison if you don't mind, because there's a more powerful story I want to share. Maybe another time we could share this. But this is the story about failure. What do we learn from failure? Failure occurs in every single person. Everyone we study had a failure or two in your lives. It's how you respond from failure that ultimately drives success. Napoleon Hill told a story about R.U. Darby, a successful insurance salesman. He and his uncle invested in a gold mine during the gold rush. And they got to a point where they were digging for gold and they quit because they couldn't find any. But it turns out they had dug and they had gotten to 3 feet from the greatest gold ore in US history. They quit before they hit the gold mine. They sold everything to a prospector. The prospector hired an engineer just to say, hey, I've got this. What do I do with it? And the guy said, after some inspection, dig 3 more feet, you'll probably find something. When they dug, they found the greatest gold ore in history. Because R.U. Darby and his uncle quit when they were 3 feet from success. This lesson actually came to bear in 1976. These 3 men got together in his living room. His name is Ronald Wayne. And they were thinking about a business. The business became Apple. So Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne together created Apple. Jobs and Wozniak got 45% each. Wayne got 10%. He was meant to be the tiebreaker between them because they were too hot-headed and they could never agree. Jobs went out and took a $15,000 line of credit to help the business. Wayne got scared. He was 21, he was 25, Wayne was 41. He felt that if they couldn't pay back the loan, the creditors would come after him since he was the most successful. And a month or so after signing, creating Apple on April 1st, 1976, he actually went back and sold his shares to them and said he didn't want to be a part of this. 10% of Apple, he gave it up because he was scared of losing. 3 feet
From gold.
The flip side of that, a guy named John Paulson, during the 2008 financial crisis, he bought what were known as credit default swaps. Probably heard of them. Most of you probably watched the movie The Big Short, and you heard of Michael Berry, who created the credit default swaps. He made $2 billion. John Paulson made $15 billion on credit default swaps. Personally, it took him about $4 billion. But the story didn't end there. 2007, a company called New Century Financial, one of the first mortgage lenders to fail, in February 2007, his credit default swaps finally became profitable. Because before he bought them in 2005, they were underwater all this time. February 2007 finally became profitable. They were about $1.25 billion in profit. All of his investors encouraging him to sell. February 2007. His employees wanted him to sell. They said, we don't know if this is going to continue. A couple of months later, the credit default swap market rebounded and his winnings fell from 1.25 billion to about $700 million. And some of them were saying, see, I told you should have said, sell now. He said, no, I'm not going to sell. And by 2008, we all know what happened. The market tanked and his credit default swaps ballooned to $15 billion.
Wow.
Making him, to this day, John Paulson, the highest earning person in the history of Wall Street in any single year. Made $2.9 billion in 2010. But he made $4.9 billion in 2010, he made $4 billion in 2008 after this. All because he understands sometimes the lessons from failure is not to quit, but is to be persevering and take calculated risks. All right, I'm going to stop here, but I want to summarize it with this. The 4 dimensions of success. Jeff Bezos says, be stubborn on the vision, be flexible on the details. Vision matters, tactics you can adjust. Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, then you're really planning to fail. Dwight D. Eisenhower says, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. The process of planning is what leads people to be successful. And the most important of them all, Thomas Edison had this say. He said, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. But this is what he said afterwards that is the key. Great accomplishments, read that, success depends not so much as ingenuity as on hard work. Master the mental, the emotional, the tactical, and the strategic. And that will lead to long-term success. I've got many more. We do it another time. I've studied the 50 of the greatest in history, and as we study them, this is for the future, not today. But that is the lessons I've learned. Sorry to keep you guys over.